I've just finished playing football, so I might appear a little bit red, but I thought I'd actually use football as a way of talking a little bit about the challenges that climate change, and particularly adapting to the impacts of climate change, or adaptation, the challenges that they pose for development institutions and organisations like ActionAid and others. So, like football, I think the first analogy I have to make would be that you need a decent team. And climate change is a relatively new issue. It's gaining ground all the time. We see it in the media. In the UK here, it's almost flooding the media, but as you move outside the UK, it's not quite as an everyday occurrence. So awareness raising, I think, is still a basic foundation for development agencies. Secondly, we need to understand the game. Not everyone likes football, not everyone understands football, but we need to get a handle on what football means for us in our lives. Development agencies to date who've worked on climate change and have made progress in working climate change into their actions tended to have done some good research about what climate change and a changing climate on the ground means for their operation, their work, whether it be in livelihoods, disasters, humanitarian aid, food security. Actually having an internal look at how these things relate to climate has been crucial. Thirdly, in football, there's no point playing on your own. You need to understand the game in terms of the other teams and the other players who are playing. So think about other development agencies who might be in the same position and perhaps forming coalitions. Here in the UK, a working group on climate change and development was formed a number of years back, and it's done great things in producing what are called the Up in Smoke documents, which you may have seen. ActionAid is a partner of the Up in Smoke coalition. And what it's done is bring everyone together so we're all on the same page and playing the same game. But there's no point just all playing football. We need to look to the other sectors, the other sports if you like, and try and connect to those too. So climate change is not just about an environmental issue, it's about the core of the development work and poverty reduction that ActionAid is trying to achieve. So connecting to other sectors, and particularly those that are climate sensitive, like livelihoods, food and humanitarian relief, and even health, connecting with those is vital. And like football, there's a football association, a kind of governing body. For climate change, this has to be the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. Now, this is where the big COP meetings that you might have heard about, the one that was recently in Nairobi, for example, and getting an understanding of what the major issues are within the convention process. Now, the majority of that revolves around how we're going to cut greenhouse gas emissions, but there's also a parallel track that's looking at how to adapt to climate change and how adaptation might be funded. And making sure that the development agency has an awareness of that process is also vital. It's a bit like a football team connecting to FIFA in the world and making sure they can play in the World Cup. Fourthly, big challenge. You're going to play football, you need some football kit. Now, you might not need the latest boots that Ronaldo uses, but what you do need is probably at least a pair of shorts and a shirt. Now, I just happen to have a pair of shorts from one of the greatest clubs in the world here, Newcastle United. But you need some tools to think about what climate change might mean for your organisation. So having the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as a first point of reference, the IPCC reports, who are about to produce their fourth assessment report, which compiles all the existing knowledge and existing research on climate change, is a good place to start working out what it might mean, what climate change impacts might be in the places you're working in and in the sectors you're working in. So there are already places where we can find scientific information, research on impacts in sectors and regions where you work, and we can also go and actually do some research, ActionAid itself on the ground with its partners, particularly through the use of vulnerability analysis. The PVA, for example, that ActionAid uses, can be used to see where the vulnerabilities to climate change might lie, as well as other vulnerabilities. And finally, if you're going to win a football match, if we're going to truly face up to climate change and reduce its negative impacts and grasp hold of its opportunities, then we need to be strategic. We can't go putting 11 people out on the field without positions and without knowing who to pass to and where anyone else is going to be. So we need to start thinking about how climate change relates to ActionAid as an organisation, and to its activities. There's the internal business of how we actually contribute individually and as an organisation to emissions, but also how does climate change affect what ActionAid is trying to do on the ground? What are the impacts on poverty and how can they be reduced? Not only direct impacts to the projects themselves, but thinking perhaps about ways that projects that ActionAid work on can actually reduce vulnerability to climate change, even if they're not specific climate change projects. So those are my 5 points really, and if you're going to play football and we're going to tackle climate change, that's a good place to start.